Welcome to A Human Perspective, a podcast where I'll be sharing work and personal experiences and learnings. I will also chop it up with guests from time to time who will also share their own perspectives. I can't promise everything you hear on this podcast will always be right, but I can promise to always give you a human perspective. My name is Lola Oguntoken, and I'm your host. Let's go. On today's show of A Human Perspective, we have Stephanie Bowker, who is co-founder of Ourspace. I actually met Stephanie during her time at Spendesk, which we'll go into in more detail soon. Welcome to A Human Perspective, Steph. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Lola, for having me. Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. We've still stayed in touch after actually only meeting once in person, but it was quite a memorable first meet.
Absolutely. I actually met Steph when I was working for a B2B SaaS company called Silverfin, and we were using the product that Steph was heading up the marketing for. It was a fresh startup. I think we were both in the same portfolio in terms of the VC company. So that's how maybe that connection happened.
Perhaps. Yeah. I think it was just honestly Tom. I think now he's the VP of Finance at Silverfin. At that point, he was the head of finance. Oh my God, he's the best.
He's amazing.
Still on the homepage of Spendesk. But I think he was just actually one of our earliest customers and advocates. And so I kind of connected through him and then quickly got to meet you.
Yes. From what I could see from the outside, Spendesk went through a huge growth as a startup company. And I know you're co-founding a startup again now. I think it would be good to get an understanding of your journey to Spendesk and through Spendesk.
Yeah, so I originally, started my career in product management at Intuit. So really got to be trained in kind of a customer first environment. And then from there, really just kind of went smaller to smaller to smaller, going from Intuit to a startup called Demandforce to Gusto and then to Spendesk. So I think I've kind of been on a journey to wanting to get my hands closer to the build. But as for Spendesk, so I joined Spendesk just after their Series A. So I think approximately maybe like employee 15. Really at that point to build marketing, which meant kickstarting inbound and repositioning the product and pricing, because at that point, like many startups, building a new category is outbound first. So yes, it was my first experience working internationally, my first experience moving from IC to manager to managers and managers. I mean, lots of firsts.
Yeah. Honestly, I think you did, or I know you did, a phenomenal job there as employee number 15. That sounds great, but that is a lot of work. What were some of the biggest challenges and some of your biggest learnings?
So I was there a little over 4 years. And so through that phase, we grew 3x year over year. We built the CFO Connect community, which was really how I mentioned how I met Tom, and expanded to multiple markets through that time. So definitely it was a moment in time that I was stretched thin and also like to just be really honest about challenged, personally. I think there was a lot of imposter syndrome through those moments of growth. Do I know what I'm doing? Am I the right person to be doing these things? So definitely I think not only was it like physically sometimes, challenging when you're working so hard, but there was a lot of emotional journey and growth on that. So you asked what was it like? I mean, honestly, wonderful experience. I cannot but say but great things about the opportunity because every day was kind of something new. What are some learnings? I mean, we might need to take this whole podcast because I felt like I was, being schooled every day in there. But I think one of my biggest learnings, and I'm taking it into Ourspace, is really being intentional with my time. Time is the biggest challenge against yourself when you're building, when you're scaling, when kind of in anything you're doing. And I think it's something I had to be much more mindful of because in my early days, I was really open to saying yes to everything because I didn't want to turn down opportunities. I didn't want to let people down. And I think that was my biggest learning is I needed to be much more intentional about saying no so that I wouldn't burn myself out, but also just set healthy boundaries on like where I should be focusing.
What techniques did you use to actually do that? Because you can set that intention. What does that look like in reality?
I think a huge part was first being more proactive in planning my time. I didn't realize how haphazardly I was in terms of just letting my schedule happen. And so I started to just really get into a much stronger routine in planning out my week ahead, blocking out time for strategic thinking, blocking out time to reach out to external people, blocking out time to help my team. So making a good balance of time for myself, for my team, but also for investing in more future-looking things.
That experience of saying no, especially the first few times you're saying it, can be quite tough. So how did you work your way through that?
I think I always try to respond to everyone, but just be clear as to why I can't offer the time.
Yeah.
And I think that's the best you can do. And I've also, I think, created some helpful resources to kind of fill in the gaps sometimes to send to people. But I think it boils down to a little bit of planning and then just ripping the Band-Aid off and saying no. And you'll be shocked at actually how receptive people are to it too. I think people understand if you're just kind of clear with them. And I think get back. I think the worst thing is kind of ghosting, just like in personal life. I think ghosting in professional life is not well received.
Yeah, absolutely. And I often say it's better to say something so that people understand than not. You talked about your progression from IC to manager of managers. What was that experience like? Because I know when you first started off at Spendesk, you were very hands-on. It was the very beginning of the marketing team. You built that team from scratch. I'm doing this. Okay, now I've got people under my wing who I need to help develop and grow and ensure that they feel successful in their role, and then that expanding even further. What was that journey like?
Well, I wish I would have said that it was intentional, a lot. To be honest, when I joined, I really didn't necessarily know where the personal opportunity was going to go or how fast Spendesk was going to grow. So I didn't have necessarily, I'd say, a step-by-step plan and okay, this is going to be my progression. But I think it was more built out of need when I first joined, in that, okay, we need someone to kind of step up and build this team. And I was really lucky that Rodolphe, the CEO and founder, had confidence in allowing me to have the opportunity. And then, honestly, building out the team mostly was really just a progression of kind of the needs of the business, and then also a mix of the interests of the people on the team. I think one of the things that I just really had was an open conversation with Rod, that I always wanted him to say and me to say, when was it too much or when was I not enough? Because I think too many times people just have this I'm here first attitude and don't kind of be realistic in the fact that sometimes you cannot grow as fast as the company needs you. And so that was one thing that we really put in place, was to have just real open and honest conversations. And also I wanted to do that for my people, the team that I was managing or empowering as well, so that they felt that I was keeping up with the needs of the business. It was quite an interesting time.
Yeah. I think I love the fact that you went into the role of actually becoming a manager, being open to knowing where you could actually do better. A lot of people fall in love with the idea of being a manager, not really understanding you've got a real responsibility for the people reporting into you. And by nature, we're all human beings. We have strengths and weaknesses, and trying to ensure that you're finding a way to be your best self for your team is very important. And I'm not sure everyone necessarily does that as a manager. So it's good to hear that that was something that was very important to you. As your team began to grow in number, you'll have the wider company culture, but then you'll have an in-team culture as well. How did you maintain that? And how did you keep your fast-growing team on track?
So 2 great questions. First, to talk about the culture. Was there even a difference between our in-team culture versus the company one? I would say definitely yes. The marketing team was even more multicultural than I would say the rest of the company, even though we already were working in a very multicultural team, which is quite fun. But being the nature, because marketing has all the different markets to be responsible for, so we definitely had a very diverse group. And so I think with that comes a subculture of your own, because you kind of have to create shared ways of communicating, and when you're coming from so many different backgrounds. How did we create a subculture? A part of it was on purpose, and I think a part of it was just by the nature of our roles. What I did during the early days and then reaffirmed through multiple kind of team offsites is that we created marketing operating principles. And so these were our own agreed ways of working just within the marketing team so that we could hold each other accountable. We had a shared language and how we wanted to give feedback. We also just kind of had our own kind of shared ways of doing things. But it's something that we did a couple times because I think it's important when you grow quickly and add people on, you want to make sure that you evolve and each new person feels a part of the fabric of the culture instead of holding tight to the early day idea and then not making room for more voices and more people. So it was an exercise over the 4 years we did 3 times. I probably should have done it one more time if I'm honest with myself. But I mean, there's always more things I could have done. But yeah, I think that was one of the ways we kept kind of our own subculture, if you will, within the marketing team.
I love the sound of that, actually having in-team principles and the fact that they're not stagnant. They do evolve based on obviously the business's needs as well as the team's needs. What do you think are some of the common myths around leadership?
I think the definition of what a leader is still kind of even what is a leader, you know? People, I think, always a lot of times, again, what you were mentioning, I think about management, conflate it to being a manager. And I really don't think management and leadership necessarily need to be one and the same, where leadership is influence and someone helping, you know, drive a group of people together in the same direction. And sometimes that's an individual contributor. Sometimes it's not your direct manager.
Yeah.
But what are some myths? I think the biggest and first one is like the myth of a leader should have all the answers. I know this was something that I really learned or de-learned, that I thought I had to have all the answers because people are looking towards you. And honestly, I think it's one of the worst perspectives to actually have. Yeah. And I'm actually afraid if anyone says that they have all the answers because it's just untrue. So I think that's the myth. I think with that closely is that leaders shouldn't show vulnerability. There's been so many more old school articles around the fact that you want to really create that sense of professionalism, even a little sense of, I don't want to say fear, but I actually don't think that it drives the respect that's necessary, I think, to be a leader. Another big one, I think, is that leadership is innate. I think leadership can be taught. I think that's another big one too, is that I think there's so much myths around, you hear people say this is a natural born leader. They just have that leadership quality. And yes, I do agree that there are some qualities, especially people who are naturally good communicators, I think usually get leadership opportunities more quickly. Yeah. But I really think leadership can be taught. And I think it's something that a lot of people have the potential to be. I think almost everyone has the potential to be if it's something that they're truly interested in doing.
Even when people do say this person is a natural born leader, what is that based on? Is it based on the fact that they're the loudest person in the room? Because sometimes that just means they're the loudest person in the room. It doesn't necessarily mean that day to day they're giving the people that they actually lead what they need in order to develop and grow. So I completely agree. And I don't think there's one type of leader. You can tweak your leadership style to suit your personality whilst adapting it to the people in your team. Everyone needs to be coached and mentored in different ways or managed in different ways. And it's important to understand people's motivations and what drives them or keeps them challenged. And I don't think it has to be, okay, you have to have this set type of personality or communicate in this very direct way or anything like that in order to show that you're a good leader. You know, you can just be a human being. And actually, I think people buy into that a little more than someone who has their walls up. So I think another element of working in a startup or something that attracts people to startup organizations is the idea around culture and the fact that it just feels much more personable in those settings. What do you think makes good culture, especially considering you're now building culture with your current company, Ourspace?
Well, just like you said, leaders don't come all in the same shapes and sizes. I also believe that of culture. I think there can be many different types of culture that are great ones. And when I say great, I think that's pretty vague, but I mean cultures that are authentic. I think cultures that allow people to feel comfortable and cultures that live true to what their values are. And they don't all have to be the same. I think, of course, there's some similar things that we all need as people, but like how those play out in terms of the ways people like to work, what's kind of the norms. I mean, what I think is most important in a culture is really authenticity. And I'm realizing it now, really, creating a company. And I've always felt it kind of having to be the marketing person, marketing the culture. It really does come from the founding team. And so I think it's important for the founding team to be really conscientious of their good qualities and their bad ones, and how to lean into their good ones and make that the principle for how you build the culture. But I think also to be really cognizant of their not so great qualities, to try to find ways to not let them overflow, because we're all people, we're going to, but the best cultures are the ones that are authentic and honest. It's also really good to be honest when you're hiring people. This is what we are, this is what we stand for, and this is what you should expect, because then I think people know what to expect. It's clear for everyone, it's transparent. What's not great is when you're sold something that's not the reality. I don't want to describe a perfect culture, because of course that would be the perfect culture for me. There's a lot of ideal cultures for different flavors of people, but I think psychological security, authenticity, and just a kindness are kind of basis, I think, of all human needs.
How much do you feel values impact culture?
Well, it depends. It's mostly how they're used. Values have become, I think, a very popular buzzword that people use as a way to be like, oh, we have values, come work for us. Here's our 4, 5, 6, 8, 12, sometimes too many words that describe who we are and what we stand for. And I think the intent is good, but I think if you don't actually use them in recruiting, use them in giving feedback, use them as a way to challenge people's performance and check each other, then I think they're pointless. But I think if you create them and, again, use them effectively and build them as a part of the ways of working, then I think they're incredibly powerful in keeping people aligned and, again, working from the same vocabulary.
I feel the branding, the marketing at Spendesk, the work you and your team did was absolutely phenomenal. Because you are behind the scenes when it comes to marketing, how much do you think brand impacts culture?
First off, thank you for all of the kind words.
It's all true.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't really word it that way, to be quite honest, because really for me, brand and culture is one and the same. Because to me, a brand is really just the ability of a company to share their values externally, and for buyers to then decide to agree with those values, or in some cases even go as far as to identify with them. So I really don't think brand affects culture as much as culture is the ingredients of a brand.
Tell us a little bit about Ourspace.
Super excited to speak about Ourspace. I talked about going smaller and smaller and smaller. Yeah, now I'm at the baseboards, the
ground
floors.
Zero.
Ground zero to kick off a company of my own with two fellow co-founders. So all three of us, Megan, who comes from the product world, most recently the VP of product at Hotjar, Mark, who's the technical co-founder, who's most recently a senior engineering manager at Glovo. We all really came together through our shared experiences of people management and leading, and how tough and hard it was to design our teams. So what we mean by that is how we figure out who gets to work on what, and how do we organize people to map to what's most important to the company, but also what's most important to those individuals. So we're really trying to disrupt this notion of how teams are built by giving manager a 360 view on their people to help make informed decisions on when they need to decide who works on what, whether that's a planned or unplanned event. The reality is managers, today are sifting through Miro boards, Notion notes, Confluences, and more to really just get full context of a person's skills, experience, performance, career journey. And then also you need to map it to, the product roadmap, the company goals, and then you're navigating things like paternity leave, unplanned departures. And so we're really bringing all that context and data into one place so managers can design more effective and collaborative teams, and that so everyone in the company can also have full transparency of what everyone is working on.
So it sounds like a proactive form of workforce planning.
This product's always been needed. The change of expectations for employees, I think the change to having hybrid to remote work, and just in general, the change of how people's careers evolved have made this an even bigger need than before. Because before, a lot of times you would choose someone for, let's say, a promotional opportunity because you sat right next to them. A lot of opportunity happens based on bias and based on just who is there in the right place. Well, now you don't sit by anyone. A lot of people are
can't see a thing.
Exactly. I think that's good too, because it also removes these biases, but it makes it really hard for managers to figure out, okay, who should work on this project, because data is everywhere and you don't also know everyone on your team. You know, if your team grows, my team doubles almost, every couple months. And so, I mean, as much as I would love to have a personal relationship with every single one, at one point you don't. And then so you don't really have the ability to make the smartest decisions for the business and for people. And so that's one of the big reasons I think now more than ever, it's really important with the change of remote and hybrid. And then secondly, it's also just the expectations and the way people work has changed as well. Before, people really were on that path, those stairs. I want to go from junior to manager to senior to this in the same track in the same company for years and years and years. The reality, that's not the case. The average tenure, I think, of an engineer now is less than 2 years. That's a lot of change you're having to deal with. And if you have people vacate, it's really hard to rectify. So now more than ever, you need to be prepared for this change. And also you want to create an opportunity for employees to stay engaged for new opportunities. So Ourspace really seeks to showcase those in a more proactive way so that you can really design your team for the future and not just kind of react to everything that comes your way.
Sounds brilliant. Just the ability to understand what's about to happen, work much more proactively and have solutions ready. A lot of the time, things are tackled as and when. It's just constant fires, and actually working in that way is disruptive for everyone. So I love the fact that this solution is proactive and supports managers in making more informed decisions as opposed to biased decisions, really being focused on the results as well. So that sounds really, really good. Thank you so much for your time today, Steph. It was brilliant talking to you about your journey at Spendesk and what you're building now as co-founder at Ourspace and your journey as a leader as well. That was very interesting to discuss. Thank you so much for coming onto A Human Perspective. I'm sure everyone's going to take quite a few learnings from this conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Lila. Thanks for having me, and I always love chatting with you.
Same. Thank you.